The morning sun cast long shadows across the Chattahoochee River as Sarah Martinez laced up her hiking boots beside her silver Honda Civic. At 28, she had made weekend solo adventures her ritual, a way to escape the suffocating routine of her accounting job in Atlanta. The river trail promised 6 miles of moderate terrain, perfect for clearing her head after another week of spreadsheets and client meetings that felt increasingly meaningless. She adjusted her day pack and checked her water bottle one final time. The parking area held only 2 other vehicles, a dusty pickup truck with Georgia plates and a newer Jeep Wrangler with mud-caked tires. Good. Fewer people meant more solitude, more space to think, without the constant chatter that seemed to follow her everywhere else in life. Sarah had discovered this particular trail 3 months earlier, after her engagement to David had ended in spectacular fashion. She still remembered walking into their shared apartment to find him packing boxes, his explanation delivered with the emotional depth of someone canceling a dinner reservation. "I just don't see us working long-term," he had said, not even looking up from folding his Columbia University sweatshirts. "We want different things." What they had wanted, she realized later, were different versions of honesty. David wanted the polished, always positive Sarah who agreed with his career plans and social circle. Sarah wanted someone who could handle the real her, the woman who sometimes cried during Pixar movies, who worried about her aging parents, who dreamed of traveling to places that didn't have 5-star hotels. The trail started easy, winding through Georgia pines and hardwood forests that were just beginning to show hints of autumn color. Sarah found her rhythm quickly, her breathing steady as she navigated the familiar path. This was her meditation, her therapy, her way of remembering who she was beneath all the expectations others placed on her. About 2 miles in, she encountered her first fellow hiker. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair and the kind of easy posture that suggested he spent more time outdoors than behind a desk. He wore practical hiking gear without the brand-name showiness she often saw on weekend warriors trying to look the part. "Morning," he said with a genuine smile as they passed each other on a narrow section of trail. "Good morning," Sarah replied, noting his slight accent. Maybe military, though she couldn't place it exactly. She thought nothing more of the brief encounter until an hour later when the trail branched toward an overlook she had been meaning to explore. The side path looked well-maintained, marked with the familiar white blazes that indicated an official route. Sarah checked her watch. She had plenty of time before she needed to head back. The overlook trail proved steeper than expected, switchbacking down toward the river through dense underbrush. Sarah took her time, testing each foothold on the increasingly rocky terrain. She could hear water somewhere below, the sound growing louder as she descended. When she finally emerged at the rocky outcrop, the view was worth every careful step. The Chattahoochee spread out below her, maybe 30 feet down, its surface broken by boulders and fallen trees that created natural pools and rapids. The water looked deceptively calm in the morning light, though she could see the current was stronger than it appeared from above. Sarah found a comfortable spot on the warm rocks and pulled out her water bottle and the granola bar she had packed. This was exactly what she needed: solitude, natural beauty, and the kind of silence that let her thoughts settle instead of racing in circles. She was so absorbed in watching a great blue heron fishing in the shallows that she almost missed the movement upstream. When she looked closer, she saw someone else had made the climb down to the water's edge. It was the hiker she had passed earlier, now sitting on a boulder about 50 yards away, with what looked like a sketchbook in his lap. Sarah felt a moment of annoyance. She had come here for solitude, and now her private sanctuary had a visitor. But something about his posture, completely absorbed in whatever he was drawing, seemingly unaware of her presence, made her relax. There was room enough along the river for both of them. She finished her granola bar and was preparing to head back up the trail when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not the rush of water over rocks or the call of birds in the trees above, but something else. A voice, maybe, calling from upstream. Sarah stood and shaded her eyes, scanning the river beyond where the other hiker sat. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the play of light and shadow on moving water. Then she spotted it. A flash of bright blue fabric caught on some branches near the far bank. Her stomach dropped as she realized what she was seeing. Someone was in the water, struggling against the current that was stronger than it looked from the safety of the rocks above. "Hey!" she called out, her voice cracking with sudden adrenaline. "Hey!" The other hiker's head snapped up, and she saw him follow her pointing arm toward the struggling figure. Without hesitation, he dropped his sketchbook and started moving along the rocky shoreline, picking his way quickly but carefully over the uneven terrain. Sarah scrambled down from her perch, her hiking boots slipping slightly on the smooth stone. Her mind raced through possibilities. Call 911, but would they have cell service down here? Try to find a way to help from the bank? The person in the water was moving downstream fast, carried by a current that looked gentle but was clearly powerful enough to prevent them from reaching either shore. As she got closer, Sarah could see it was a young woman, maybe early 20s, wearing a bright blue jacket over what looked like street clothes, jeans and sneakers, not hiking gear. Her face appeared above the water intermittently as she fought to keep her head up, her movements becoming more frantic as she realized the current was winning. The other hiker had reached a point directly across from where the woman was struggling. Sarah watched him quickly assess the situation, his movements deliberate and calm despite the urgency. He called something to the woman, though Sarah couldn't make out the words over the sound of rushing water. Then, before Sarah could fully process what was happening, he was in the water. Not jumping in recklessly, but entering with the controlled movement of someone who understood water and current and the physics of river rescue. He had stripped off his hiking boots and shirt, keeping only his quick, dry pants, and entered the river at an angle upstream from where the woman was fighting the current. Sarah felt her chest tighten with fear and admiration. This was incredibly dangerous. The Chattahoochee had claimed lives before, and she had no idea if this stranger was qualified to attempt a rescue or if she was about to watch two people drown instead of one. The woman's struggles were becoming weaker, her head going under more frequently. Sarah could see she was approaching exhaustion, that moment when panic gives way to the deadly calm that precedes drowning. The current was carrying her toward a section where the river narrowed between two large boulders, creating a chute that would either push her toward the bank or trap her against the rocks. The rescuer was swimming hard now, not fighting the current but working with it, angling across the river's flow in a diagonal pattern that would intercept the woman's path. Sarah found herself holding her breath, her hands clenched into fists as she watched the desperate race between human effort and natural force. He reached her just before the rocky narrows. Sarah saw him grab the woman from behind, wrapping one arm across her chest while he worked to position them both for the current to carry them toward the eastern bank, where the water was shallower. The woman seemed to panic at first, fighting against her rescuer until he said something that made her stop struggling. Now came the hardest part. Both of them were at the mercy of the current, but he seemed to understand how to read the water, how to use the river's own energy to carry them towards safety rather than fighting against it. Sarah watched them disappear around a bend, then scrambled along the rocky shoreline, trying to keep them in sight. When she caught up, they were in the shallows near a small beach of river stones, both of them breathing hard. The woman was on her hands and knees, coughing up water, while her rescuer sat beside her with one steadying hand on her back. "You're okay," Sarah heard him saying, his voice calm and reassuring. "You're safe now. Just breathe." Sarah approached carefully, not wanting to intrude but unable to stay away. Up close, she could see the rescued woman was probably a college student, with the kind of fashion-forward outfit that suggested she had been somewhere near the river for reasons that had nothing to do with hiking. "I was taking pictures," the young woman gasped between coughs. For my Instagram. I wanted to get close to the water for a better shot, and the rocks were so slippery. Her rescuer nodded without judgment. The moss on these river rocks is like ice when it's wet. Are you hurt anywhere? Can you move your arms and legs okay? As he methodically checked for injuries, Sarah got her first clear look at him. He was older than she had initially thought, probably mid-30s, with the kind of calm competence that suggested experience with crisis situations. His movements were efficient and gentle as he made sure his patient wasn't seriously injured. "What's your name?" he asked the young woman. "Jessica. Jessica Chen. I'm a sophomore at Georgia Tech." She was starting to shiver now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "I can't believe I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid," he said firmly. "The river's more dangerous than it looks. Happens to experienced hikers, too." He looked up at Sarah. "Could you help me get her up to the trail? She needs to get warm and dry." Sarah nodded, already shrugging off her light jacket to offer to Jessica. "I'm Sarah. That was incredible what you did." He stood up, water still dripping from his hair and chest. "I'm Marcus, and we're not out of the woods yet. Jessica, how do you feel about hiking back up to the parking area? We need to get you somewhere warm, maybe have a paramedic take a look at you." Jessica nodded shakily. "I think I can walk. My car's up there." "Did you come alone?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer would worry her. "Yeah, I know. You're not supposed to hike alone. But I just wanted some pictures for my photography class, and this seemed like an easy trail." Marcus was already pulling his shirt back on, his movements businesslike but not unkind. "Let's focus on getting you back up there. We can call 911 from the parking lot, have them send someone to check you out properly." The climb back up to the main trail was slow going. Jessica was steady on her feet but clearly shaken, and both Marcus and Sarah stayed close in case she stumbled. Sarah found herself studying Marcus as they walked, noting how he seemed to anticipate potential problems. Loose rocks, slippery sections, places where Jessica might need extra support. "Are you a doctor?" Sarah asked during one of their rest stops. Marcus shook his head. "Former Army. Did some water rescue training, but I'm no expert. Just got lucky today." Sarah doubted luck had much to do with it. She had seen the way he read the current, the controlled way he entered the water, the calm competence of his rescue technique. This wasn't luck. This was training and experience applied under pressure. When they finally reached the main trail, Jessica's color was better, and she had stopped shivering. The warm jacket and steady movement had done their work, though Sarah knew she was probably still in mild shock. "I can't thank you enough," Jessica said to Marcus as they approached the parking area. "I thought I was going to die down there." "You did good fighting the current as long as you did," Marcus replied. "That bought us the time we needed." At the parking lot, they found Jessica's car, a white Honda Accord with a Georgia Tech parking decal and various bumper stickers that proclaimed her interests in environmental causes and indie music. Marcus insisted on calling 911 despite Jessica's protests that she felt fine. "River water's not the cleanest," he explained while they waited for the EMTs. "Better to have someone check you out, maybe get you started on antibiotics as a precaution." Sarah sat with Jessica on the tailgate of Marcus's pickup truck, which turned out to be the dusty vehicle she had noticed when she arrived. Up close, she could see it was well-maintained despite its weathered appearance, with camping and hiking gear organized neatly in the bed. "So you're military?" Sarah asked Marcus when he finished his call to emergency services. "Was. Army Corps of Engineers did 2 tours overseas. Now I work for the state, mostly water management and flood control." He handed Jessica a bottle of water from his truck. "Drink this slowly. Small sips." The EMTs arrived within 20 minutes, efficient and thorough in their examination of Jessica. Her vital signs were good, no signs of serious hypothermia or water aspiration, but they agreed with Marcus's assessment that she should see a doctor as a precaution. "I'll follow her to the hospital," Sarah found herself saying, surprised by her own words. "Make sure she gets there okay." Jessica looked grateful. "You don't have to do that. I already ruined your hiking day." "You didn't ruin anything," Sarah replied, meaning it. "Besides, I think we could all use some coffee and a chance to decompress." Marcus was packing his gear back into his truck, moving with the same methodical efficiency Sarah had noticed earlier. She realized she didn't want this encounter to end, didn't want to go back to her solitary weekend routine without understanding more about the man who had just risked his life for a stranger. "Would you like to join us?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "For coffee, I mean, after we get Jessica checked out." He looked up from securing his camping gear, considering her invitation with the same careful attention he had given everything else that morning. "I'd like that," he said finally. And Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Georgia sun. As they prepared to leave the trail parking lot, Sarah glanced back toward the path that led to the river overlook. A few hours ago, she had come here seeking solitude and clarity. Instead, she had witnessed an act of courage that reminded her what real strength looked like, and found herself drawn to a man who embodied the kind of quiet heroism she had begun to think existed only in movies. Jessica was already feeling better, chatting with the EMTs about her photography class and promising to stick to safer locations for future shoots. Marcus was double-checking that everything was secure in his truck, his movements careful and deliberate. Sarah started her Honda and waited for the small convoy to form, Jessica's car, her own, and Marcus's pickup bringing up the rear. As they pulled out of the parking area, she caught sight of Marcus in her rearview mirror, his expression thoughtful as he navigated the winding access road. She had no idea where this day would lead, but for the first time in months, Sarah felt genuinely curious about the answer. The morning's events had cracked something open inside her, some long-held assumption about the kind of person she was and the kind of life she wanted to live. Behind them, the Chattahoochee continued its ancient journey toward the sea, carrying with it the memory of morning sunlight and the echo of voices calling across moving water, the sound of one person reaching for another in a moment when courage mattered more than fear. The emergency room at Piedmont, Atlanta, was surprisingly quiet for a Saturday afternoon. Jessica sat on an examination table, looking remarkably recovered for someone who had been fighting for her life in the Chattahoochee just 3 hours earlier. The hospital gown hung loose on her small frame, and her damp clothes were sealed in a plastic bag at her feet. Sarah paced near the window, unable to sit still despite the comfortable chairs arranged around the small room. She kept replaying the morning's events, particularly the moment when Marcus had entered the water without hesitation. There had been something almost fluid about his movements, as if he had done this before. Not exactly this, but something similar enough that his body knew what to do before his mind could interfere with doubt. Marcus stood leaning against the doorframe, his hiking clothes mostly dry now, but still wrinkled from his impromptu swim. He had been checking his phone periodically, responding to what looked like work messages with quick, efficient texts. "I still can't believe I did something so stupid," Jessica said for the 4th time since they had arrived. "My roommate always says I'm too impulsive, but this was next-level dumb." "You made a mistake," Marcus replied with the same patient tone he had used each previous time. "The important thing is you're okay." Dr. Patricia Williams, a woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes, entered carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone delivering good news. "Well, Jessica, everything looks normal. Your lung function is fine. No signs of secondary drowning. Temperature's back to normal. You were lucky." "Thanks to him," Jessica said, nodding toward Marcus. "Dr. E." Williams glanced at Marcus with professional interest. "Military background?" "Army Corps of Engineers. Some water rescue training, but nothing formal for civilian situations. Well, you did everything right. The way you entered the water, managed the current, kept her calm. That's textbook swift water rescue. She turned back to Jessica. I'm going to prescribe a preventive antibiotic just in case. River water carries a lot of bacteria that you don't want in your system. And I want you to watch for any respiratory symptoms over the next 48 hours. If you develop a fever, cough, or have any trouble breathing, come back immediately. Jessica nodded, already reaching for her street clothes. Can I drive home? As long as you feel steady. Do you have someone who can stay with you tonight? Sometimes delayed shock can set in. My roommate will be there. She's going to freak out when I tell her what happened. Sarah found herself speaking before she had consciously decided to. I could give you my number, in case you need anything or have questions. Jessica looked surprised, but pleased. Really? That's so nice of you. I mean, you guys don't even know me. Sometimes that makes it easier to help, Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what she meant by that. There was something about the morning's shared crisis that had created an odd sense of connection with both Jessica and Marcus, a feeling that they were now part of each other's stories in a way that couldn't be easily undone. 20 minutes later, they stood in the hospital parking lot as Jessica drove away in her Honda, waving through the open window like she was heading off to a college party rather than home to recover from a near-drowning experience. The afternoon sun was warm on Sarah's face, and she realized she felt more awake than she had in weeks. Coffee? Marcus asked, keys already in his hand. I know a place about 10 minutes from here. Nothing fancy, but they make it strong enough to cut through the adrenaline crash. Sarah looked at her own car, then back at Marcus. There was something about the way he had handled everything, the rescue, Jessica's care, the hospital logistics, that made her want to know more about who he was when he wasn't saving people. I'll follow you. The coffee shop turned out to be a small, locally owned place called The Daily Grind, tucked into a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore. The interior was decorated with an eclectic mix of mismatched furniture and local artwork, the kind of place that felt lived in rather than designed. Marcus seemed to know the layout well, leading her to a corner table near windows that looked out onto a small courtyard garden. Regular spot? Sarah asked as they settled into chairs that looked like they had been salvaged from different decades. I come here when I'm working in this part of the city. Good coffee, decent Wi-Fi, and they don't mind if you camp out for a few hours with paperwork. Marcus flagged down a server, a college-aged guy with elaborate tattoos covering both arms. 2 coffees, dark roast. You want anything to eat? The sandwiches here are actually pretty good. Sarah realized she was hungry. The morning's drama had driven thoughts of food completely from her mind. Something simple. Turkey and Swiss, maybe? After they ordered, an oddly comfortable silence settled between them. Sarah found herself studying Marcus more carefully than she had been able to during the morning's crisis. He had an interesting face, she decided, not conventionally handsome, but compelling in the way that suggested depth and experience. His hands, wrapped around his coffee mug, were calloused in a way that spoke of physical work, not just office tasks. So, water management, Sarah said eventually. That sounds more interesting than my job. What do you do? Corporate accounting, exciting stuff like quarterly reports and tax compliance. She made a face. I keep telling myself I'll figure out what I actually want to do with my life. But the paychecks are steady and the benefits are good. Marcus nodded as if this made perfect sense. Security has its appeal, especially when you've seen what happens when people don't have it. Is that what military service taught you? Among other things. He took a sip of coffee, considering his words. Mostly it taught me that planning for the worst-case scenario isn't pessimism. It's just practical. And that when something does go wrong, staying calm and working the problem usually gets you further than panic. Sarah thought about the morning, about the controlled way Marcus had assessed the situation and acted. Is that what you were doing in the river? Working the problem? Pretty much. Swift water rescue has basic principles. Don't fight the current, use it to get where you need to go. Approach from upstream so the current helps instead of fighting against you. Keep the victim calm so they don't drag you both under. Marcus paused, running a hand through his still damp hair. The hard part is reading the water fast enough to make the right decisions. Have you done that before? River rescue, I mean? Not exactly. We did training scenarios in the Army, and I've pulled a couple of people out of flood situations for work, but nothing quite like this morning. Their food arrived, and Sarah took a bite of her sandwich while processing this information. She had assumed Marcus was some kind of professional rescuer, someone whose job involved regular heroics. Learning that he had essentially improvised the whole thing made what he had done seem even more remarkable. "What made you decide to go in?" she asked. "Most people would have called 911 and hoped for the best." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah wondered if she had pushed too hard, asked something too personal. But when he looked up, his expression was thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. "I had a buddy in Afghanistan," he said slowly. "Good guy, smart engineer, careful about everything. One day we were crossing a river with some local contractors, and one of them, young kid, maybe 19, got caught by the current. My buddy was the strongest swimmer in our unit, and he went after the kid without thinking twice." Sarah felt her chest tighten, anticipating where this story was going. "They both drowned. Current was stronger than anyone realized, and there were debris and rocks under the surface that we couldn't see." Marcus picked at his sandwich, not eating. "After that, I promised myself I'd never watch someone drown if there was anything I could do to prevent it, even if the odds were bad." "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly. "About your friend." "His name was Danny Morrison. From Ohio. Had a girlfriend back home he was planning to marry after deployment." Marcus met her eyes. "I think about him sometimes when I'm making risk assessments for work. Would Danny have thought this was worth the risk? What would he have done?" Sarah felt something shift in her understanding of Marcus, a recognition that the morning's heroics weren't random impulse, but part of a deeper code he lived by. She thought about her own life, about how rarely she was called to make choices that mattered beyond her immediate comfort and security. "Do you ever regret it? Going into dangerous situations?" "I mean, sometimes. But I regret the times I didn't act more than the times I did." Marcus took a drink of coffee. "What about you? Ever find yourself in situations where you had to choose between safe and right?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She opened her mouth to give some easy answer, then stopped and really considered it. When had she last taken a meaningful risk? When had she last done something that mattered more than her own convenience? "I think I've gotten very good at avoiding those situations," she admitted, "which probably says something not very flattering about my life choices. Or maybe it says you haven't found something worth taking risks for yet." There was something in the way Marcus said this that made Sarah look at him more carefully. He wasn't judging her, wasn't suggesting she was cowardly or shallow. Instead, he seemed genuinely curious about her answer, as if her perspective mattered to him. "What about your work?" she asked, deflecting slightly. "Water management and flood control. That must involve some risk assessment." Marcus seemed to recognize her subject change, but allowed it. "Mostly it's about predicting where problems might occur and trying to prevent them. Dam inspections, floodplain mapping, emergency response planning. Not as exciting as it might sound. But important. Yeah, it matters. When we do our job well, nobody notices because nothing goes wrong. When we mess up, people lose their homes or worse." Sarah found herself comparing this to her own work, where success was measured in perfectly balanced spreadsheets and tax returns filed on time. important in its way, but removed from immediate human consequences. Do you like it? The work, I mean? Most days, it's good work with good people, and it pays well enough to support the lifestyle I want. Marcus gestured toward the window, where afternoon light was filtering through the courtyard garden. I get to spend time outdoors, work on projects that might actually help people. Better than being stuck in a cubicle. What's the lifestyle you want? The question came out more personal than Sarah had intended, but Marcus didn't seem bothered by it. Nothing too complicated. A place in the mountains, maybe near a river or lake, time for hiking and camping, space for a workshop where I can build furniture or work on my truck, good neighbors but enough privacy that I don't have to make small talk every time I check the mail. Sarah smiled at this. That sounds nice, peaceful. What about you? What would your ideal life look like? Sarah realized she didn't have a ready answer. For years, her goals had been defined by other people's expectations. David's career ambitions, her parents' desire for stability, her company's promotion track. What did she actually want? I don't know, she said honestly. For the longest time, I thought I wanted the conventional things. Marriage, house in the suburbs, maybe kids eventually. But after my engagement ended, I started wondering if those were really my goals or just what I thought I was supposed to want. What happened with your engagement? If you don't mind me asking. Sarah found herself telling Marcus about David, about the careful distance he had maintained from anything messy or complicated in their relationship, about his explanation that they wanted different things without ever specifying what those things were. He wasn't wrong, she concluded. We did want different things. He wanted someone who would fit into his life without changing it. I wanted someone who would be curious about who I really was, even the parts that weren't convenient or pretty. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like you dodged a bullet. That's what my friends say. But it's hard not to wonder if maybe I was just too demanding, too complicated. Or maybe he was too simple. The way Marcus said this, matter of fact, without judgment, made something loosen in Sarah's chest. For months, she had been carrying around the worry that her failed engagement was evidence of some fundamental flaw in her character. But sitting across from a man who had risked his life for a stranger that morning, she began to consider that maybe the problem hadn't been her complexity, but David's inability to handle it. Can I ask you something? Sarah said, feeling suddenly bold. Sure. This morning, when you went into the water, were you scared? Marcus considered the question seriously. Yeah, I was scared, but not of drowning exactly. More scared of not being fast enough, or making the wrong choice, or having to watch that girl die because I hesitated. But you didn't hesitate. No, I didn't, but that doesn't mean I wasn't terrified the whole time. Sarah felt something click into place. Some understanding about courage that she had never quite grasped before. She had always thought brave people were fearless, but Marcus was describing something different, acting despite fear, not in the absence of it. I think I've spent most of my adult life trying to avoid being scared, she admitted. How's that working out for you? Sarah laughed, surprised by the question and by her answer. Terribly, actually. Turns out a life without risk is also a life without much meaning. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching other customers come and go from the coffee shop. Sarah noticed how Marcus seemed to track each new arrival, taking in their appearance and demeanor with the automatic assessment of someone trained to notice potential problems. But it didn't seem paranoid or anxious, more like a habit born of years when such awareness could mean the difference between safety and danger. What are you thinking about? She asked when she caught him studying a businessman arguing loudly into his phone near the counter. Wondering what's got that guy so worked up, and whether you'd like to have dinner sometime. The casual way Marcus connected these two thoughts, his observational habits and his interest in seeing her again, caught Sarah completely off guard. She felt her face warm and was annoyed by her own reaction. I'd like that, she said, trying to match his casual tone. Good. I was hoping Jessica's near-death experience wouldn't be the only reason we got to know each other. Sarah laughed. That would be a lot of pressure for future relationships. So, how did you two meet? Well, he saved someone from drowning and then we bonded over coffee. Could be worse conversation starters. True. Most of my dates begin with discussions of tax law or quarterly projections. Marcus smiled. I promise to keep accounting questions to a minimum. And I promise not to throw myself in any rivers just to see if you'll rescue me too. Appreciated. My heroic quota for the day is pretty much maxed out. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Sarah realized the day had taken on a dreamlike quality. This morning, she had been a single woman focused on her own problems, hiking alone as a form of therapy. Now, she was part of a story that included river rescue and hospital visits, and tentative plans for dinner with a man who seemed to embody qualities she had begun to think existed only in fiction. I should probably head home, she said, though she was reluctant to end the conversation. But I'm glad we did this, all of it. Even Jessica's dramatic swimming lesson. Me too. And Sarah? Marcus paused at the coffee shop door. For what it's worth, I think you're exactly complicated enough. The way he said it, sincere but not overly serious, made Sarah feel something she hadn't experienced in months. Not just attraction, though that was certainly present, but a sense of possibility. The feeling that her story might be heading in directions she couldn't predict, toward experiences that would require the kind of courage Marcus had demonstrated that morning. As they walked to their cars in the late afternoon sunshine, Sarah found herself thinking about fear and risk and the difference between safety and stagnation. She thought about Jessica, who had made a reckless choice, but had also been brave enough to fight the current until help arrived. She thought about Marcus, who had calculated the odds and decided that some things were worth the risk of failure. And she thought about herself, standing at the edge of something that felt both dangerous and necessary, wondering if she had the courage to find out what lay beyond the comfortable boundaries of her carefully managed life. 3 weeks after the river rescue, Sarah found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror at 6:30 on a Friday evening, trying to decide if the dress she had chosen for dinner with Marcus was trying too hard or not trying hard enough. They had seen each other twice since their coffee shop conversation, once for a casual lunch and once for a hiking date on a much safer trail, but tonight felt different, more intentional. The phone call had come that afternoon while she was reviewing quarterly reports that seemed increasingly meaningless with each passing day. Marcus's voice had carried an unusual tension, something she couldn't quite identify. "Are you free tonight?" he had asked, without preamble. "I know it's short notice, but I could really use some company." Sarah had said yes immediately, surprised by how quickly she had rearranged her evening plans. She had been looking forward to a quiet night with takeout and Netflix, but the undercurrent in Marcus's voice suggested he needed more than casual conversation. Now, as she applied lip gloss with unsteady hands, she wondered what had prompted his call. In their previous conversations, Marcus had shown glimpses of depth and complexity, but he maintained a certain reserve about his emotional landscape. Tonight felt like it might be different. The restaurant Marcus had chosen was a small Italian place in Virginia Highland, the kind of neighborhood spot with hand-written specials and tables close enough that conversations felt intimate without being private. Sarah arrived first, choosing a corner table where they could talk without being overheard by other diners. When Marcus walked through the door, she immediately noticed something different about his posture. The easy confidence she had grown accustomed to was still there, but underneath it was something else. A brittleness, maybe, like someone holding themselves together through careful control. "Thanks for coming on such short notice," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "I hope I didn't mess up any plans." "Nothing that mattered. Besides, I was curious about what could make the unflappable Marcus need company on a Friday night. Marcus smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Unflappable. Is that how you see me? Among other things. Sarah studied his face, noting the tension around his eyes that hadn't been there during their previous meetings. But tonight you look like someone who's been thinking too much about something. The server approached before Marcus could respond, and they ordered wine and appetizers through a conversation that felt oddly formal. Sarah sensed Marcus was working up to something, gathering his thoughts or his courage for a discussion that wouldn't come easily. "I got a call this morning," Marcus said finally, after their wine had been delivered and the server had retreated to a safe distance. "From the wife of my buddy Danny, the one I told you about who drowned in Afghanistan." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Oh. She's getting remarried. Next month, to a guy she's been seeing for about a year. She wanted me to know because she thought I might hear about it through mutual friends." Marcus took a long sip of wine, and Sarah waited for him to continue. She could see this was leading somewhere, but she didn't want to rush him toward whatever revelation was building. "The thing is," Marcus continued, "I was in love with Danny's girlfriend. Am in love with her, I guess, though I never told anyone. Not Danny, not her, not anybody." Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. Of all the things she had expected Marcus to tell her, this wasn't even on the list. She forced herself to keep her expression neutral, though her mind was racing through the implications. "Her name is Elena," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. "She and Danny met in college, and she used to write him letters during deployment. Long, funny letters about her job teaching kindergarten and her ridiculous family and books she was reading. Danny would share parts of them sometimes. And I started looking forward to hearing about Elena almost as much as he did." Marcus paused, staring at his wine glass. "When we got leave, Danny would talk about nothing but getting home to Elena. He had this ring he carried everywhere, planning the perfect proposal. And I would listen and offer advice and pretend to be happy for him while I was falling in love with a woman I had never met, based on nothing but her letters and Danny's descriptions." Sarah felt like she was holding her breath. This was clearly territory Marcus had never shared with anyone, and she understood instinctively that how she responded would matter enormously. "After Danny died," Marcus continued, "Elena wrote to me. She said Danny had mentioned me in his letters, and she wanted to thank me for being his friend. We started corresponding, and eventually we met when I came back to the States. And I realized that I hadn't been imagining things. Elena was exactly as remarkable as I thought she would be. Funny and smart and kind, but also strong enough to handle grief without falling apart. We became friends, real friends, and I told myself that was enough." Marcus looked up at Sarah, and she saw something raw in his expression that made her chest ache. But it wasn't enough. The more time I spent with Elena, the more I wanted to tell her how I felt. And the more guilty I felt for wanting something that had belonged to my dead friend. It felt like a betrayal of the worst kind. Sarah reached across the table and covered Marcus's hand with her own, a gesture that felt both natural and insufficient. "What did you do?" I pulled back. Started finding excuses not to visit, took work assignments that kept me traveling. I told myself I was being noble, preserving Danny's memory and Elena's right to grieve without complications. "But you were really protecting yourself." Marcus looked at her with surprise. "How do you know that?" "Because I recognize the pattern. It's what I did with David, what I do with most things that matter. I tell myself I'm being considerate or appropriate, when really, I'm just avoiding the risk of being rejected or disappointed." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this insight. Their appetizers arrived, and they picked at the food without much enthusiasm while the weight of the conversation settled around them. "So Elena's getting married," Sarah said eventually, To a good guy, from what I can tell. A pediatrician who makes her laugh and wants kids and seems to understand how lucky he is. Marcus took a bite of bruschetta without really tasting it. She deserves that. She deserves someone who can love her without guilt or complication. And you think you can't do that? I don't know. For 3 years, I've been carrying around this idea that my feelings for Elena were somehow wrong, that they dishonored Danny's memory. But hearing about her engagement today made me realize something. Sarah waited, sensing they were approaching the real reason for tonight's dinner. I realized that I've been using guilt about Danny as an excuse to avoid taking emotional risks with anyone, including you. The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt her heart rate increase. This was heading toward territory she wasn't sure she was prepared to navigate. What kind of risks? She asked quietly. The risk of letting you see who I really am. The risk of admitting that I think about you constantly. That I look forward to your texts more than anything else in my week. That I'm falling for you harder than I've ever fallen for anyone. Sarah felt like she had been hit by lightning. In 3 weeks of careful conversation and tentative getting to know each other, Marcus had shown interest, but never this level of emotional directness. She wasn't sure how to respond to such naked honesty. Marcus, I'm not asking you to feel the same way, he said quickly. I just needed you to know where I stand, because I'm tired of being careful all the time, tired of protecting myself from disappointment by never fully committing to anything that matters. Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to deflect, to make a joke or change the subject to safer ground. But Marcus's courage in sharing something so personal demanded an equally honest response. I'm scared, she said finally. Of me? Of this. Of caring about someone again. Of being seen completely. Sarah took a shaky breath. David left because I was too complicated, too emotional, too much work. What happens when you realize I'm all of those things and more? Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense. What if you're not too much? What if you're exactly enough? You don't know me, not really. You've seen me on good days, when I'm hiking and feeling confident. You haven't seen me crying over a commercial about dogs or having a panic attack because I can't decide what to order at a restaurant or staying in bed all weekend because I can't face the world. Show me. The simplicity of his response caught Sarah completely off guard. What? Show me the parts of yourself that scare you. Trust me with the complicated stuff. Let me decide if I'm strong enough to handle it. Sarah felt tears threatening, and she blinked hard to keep them from falling. This was exactly what she had wanted from David but had been too afraid to ask for. Someone willing to see her completely, to know her at her worst and choose to stay anyway. What if you can't handle it? What if I show you who I really am and you decide it's too much trouble? Then I'm not the man you think I am, and you're better off without me. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. But what if I can handle it? What if knowing all of you just makes me love you more? The word love hung between them, and Sarah felt something fundamental shift in her chest. This wasn't the careful, measured progression she had experienced with David, where emotions were parceled out safely and predictably. This was something more dangerous and more real. I have depression, she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. Not just sadness or mood swings, but clinical depression that I take medication for and sometimes manage badly. There are days when I can't get out of bed, days when I cry for no reason, days when I'm convinced I'm a failure at everything that matters. Marcus didn't flinch or look away. He just held her hand and waited for her to continue. I hate my job, but I'm too scared to quit because what if I can't find anything better? I want to travel and write and do something meaningful with my life, but I'm terrified of giving up security for something uncertain. I'm 38 years old and I feel like I'm still waiting for my real life to begin. What else? Marcus asked gently. I'm afraid of being alone. but I'm also afraid of being with someone who might leave. I second-guess every decision I make and then resent myself for being indecisive. I cry during movies and commercials, and sometimes just because the light is pretty. I worry constantly about my parents getting older and whether I'm a good enough daughter. Sarah realized she was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks despite her efforts to maintain control. I'm messy and complicated, and I don't have my life figured out, and most days I feel like I'm pretending to be more together than I actually am. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah braced herself for his retreat. This was where David had started pulling away, when her real self became too much work, too inconvenient for the life he wanted to live. "Are you done?" Marcus asked, finally. "For now." "Okay." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Now let me tell you what I see." Sarah looked up at him through her tears, expecting kindness but preparing for disappointment. "I see someone brave enough to hike alone when she needs space to think. I see someone who stayed with Jessica at the hospital even though she barely knew her, who offered her phone number to a stranger who needed help. I see someone who asks good questions and listens to the answers, who notices things other people miss." Marcus paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I see someone who cares deeply about doing the right thing, even when it's inconvenient. Someone who's honest about her struggles instead of pretending they don't exist. Someone who's looking for meaning and purpose and isn't willing to settle for less, even when settling would be easier." Sarah felt her chest loosen, some long-held tension beginning to release. "I see someone who saved my life 3 weeks ago by asking me to coffee, by being curious about who I am, by making me remember that connection with another person is worth the risk of getting hurt. I didn't save your life." "You did. You just didn't realize it." Marcus smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "I was drowning too, Sarah, just in a different way." They sat in silence for a few minutes, holding hands across the table while around them other diners continued their own conversations, unaware that something fundamental was shifting at the corner table. "Will you be here if I uncover my heart?" Sarah murmured finally, the question shaken from her by the morning's current of honesty. "Will you stay when you see all the broken and difficult parts?" Marcus leaned forward and kissed her hand, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. "Try me." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something she had given up hoping for, not the promise of perfection, but the promise of presence. Someone willing to weather the storms as well as enjoy the sunshine, someone strong enough to hold her complexity without trying to simplify it away. "Okay," she whispered, the word carrying more weight than any she had ever spoken. "Let's try." As they finished dinner and walked to their cars in the warm Georgia evening, Sarah felt like she was floating, not with the artificial lightness of denial, but with the genuine relief that comes from being known and accepted. The conversation had been terrifying and necessary, and she was amazed to find herself still standing on the other side of such vulnerability. "What happens now?" she asked as they reached her car. "Now we take it one day at a time. We learn about each other. We make mistakes and forgive them. We build something real." Marcus kissed her then, gentle and sure. And Sarah felt something settle into place inside her chest. This wasn't the desperate passion of early romance or the careful politeness of a relationship built on compromise. This was something steadier and more hopeful, the beginning of love based on truth rather than illusion. As she drove home, Sarah thought about currents and rescue and the courage it takes to trust someone with your life. She thought about Marcus in the river, calculating risks and choosing action over safety. She thought about her own leap of faith tonight, revealing her authentic self and trusting him to handle it with care. The Chattahoochee continued its ancient journey through the Georgia mountains, carrying with it the memory of a morning when three strangers became part of each other's stories. But in a small restaurant in Virginia Highland, a different kind of rescue had taken place. Two people pulling each other from the isolation of their carefully guarded hearts into the dangerous, necessary current of real love. Sarah smiled as she pulled into her driveway, no longer afraid of what the current might bring.